Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 187th episode of Stories of Service, Ordinary People Who Do Extraordinary Work. And today, as you see, I've got three other people on the screen with me today. And that's because I'm going to do a very, very special version of the Stories of Service broadcast, which I don't normally get to do a story such as this. And what makes this one so incredibly, I think, special is the fact that we are going to be talking about a documentary. And one of the things that I've been wanting to do for so long is to get into some of the other arts on the Stories of Service podcast. So with that, I'm going to kick off the show, tell you guys a little bit about what we're doing here with an intro from my father, Charlie.
From the moment we're born and lock eyes with our parents, we are inspiring others. By showing up as a vessel of service, we not only help others, we help ourselves. Welcome to S.O.S, Stories of Service, hosted by Teresa Carpenter, here from ordinary people from all walks of life who have transformed their communities by performing extraordinary work.
And today we're going to be talking also about the wounds of war, which may never be forgotten, but for many, and the people who I'm going to profile here today, that pain becomes a driving force for something greater. And today, I also welcome back a returning guest, Mike Meyers, who's from the National Military Basketball Association. So I have had him on a previous podcast, and he's going to join Nicole Amelio, and Robert Vincent O'Berg, whose own story of hope and healing is part of a new series. The series is called Resilience, and it brings to life the raw and powerful stories of the GWOT generation, which, of course, I am also a member of that GWOT generation, told by those who lived it. This 6-season endeavor, produced by Amelio Media in partnership with the Military Basketball Association, Humanity Pictures, and the Army Heritage Foundation, captures the triumphs born from trauma. The series will begin with the Army Black Knights' historic 2007-2008 deployment to Iraq, where they made a bold strategic decision, partnering with former Sunni insurgents as frontline allies in combat. This extraordinary story of brotherhood, sacrifice, and courage is just the beginning of a larger mission to showcase the resilience of those who served and the lasting impact of their experiences. Each season will explore different stories of service members like Robert O'Berg, who's featured here, who turned adversity into strength, continuing to serve their communities long after leaving the battlefield. The message is clear. Resilience is forged in service, and the impact is immeasurable. With Resilience, Amelio Media aims to reach 10 million veterans and their families. And today we're going to talk about how you can help. So to kick this off, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about each one of these guests, and then we're going to turn to some of them and ask them a few questions about the podcast. So first off, over here on my, I guess that would be my right, I have Robert Vincent O'Berg. Robert O'Berg is a retired U.S. Marine Corps Mustang and combat disabled veteran whose life is defined by faith, service, and resilience. After the tragic loss of two cousins in the 9/11 attacks, he enlisted in the Marines, deploying in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom as a CH-53E Super Stallion Weapons and Tactics Crew Chief Instructor. His journey from growing up in a single-parent home in Staten Island to serving in combat has shaped his mission to help others find healing and purpose. A Pat Tillman scholar, Rob is pursuing a PhD in leadership studies at the University of San Diego, building on his executive MBA and multiple degrees in security, conflict resolution, and Arabic studies. He is the founder of Inspiratus LLC, a service-disabled veteran-owned small business dedicated to transformational leadership coaching and restorative justice for veterans. As a husband and father, he continues to serve his community by working with Gold Star families, incarcerated veterans, and those struggling with moral injury, ensuring that every sacrifice is honored with action and purpose. And below me is the maker of the documentary, Nicole Amelio Casper, an award-winning documentarian with a passion for storytelling that amplifies unheard voices. A former military spouse who lived across the United States and Europe, she began her filmmaking career at American Military Forces Network in Germany. She has since directed and produced compelling short documentaries for nonprofits nationwide, using film to drive awareness and change. Her signature work, The Journey Back to Normal, a look at complementary therapies to combat PTSD, gained national recognition, earning multiple Best Documentary Awards and support from Game of Thrones creator George R.R. Martin. Nicole's film has been screened at major universities, VFWs, and film festivals, and has even been incorporated into college curriculums. She continues to produce impactful documentaries, working on Resilience, the docuseries, a follow-up to The Journey Back to Normal that delves deeper into veterans' military experiences. As a sought-after speaker and a public relations professional, Nicole remains dedicated to using storytelling to educate, heal, and inspire. And lastly, but not least, Mike Meyers. He is the commissioner of the Military Basketball Association. I've had him on my show before, and he is the founder, launching the organization in 2017. It's the only one of its kind to support military basketball as a tool for resilience and community building. A retired U.S. Army combat veteran with 23 years of service, Mike began his career as a human resource specialist before commissioning as a quartermaster officer. He deployed to Iraq during the 2006 surge and was medically evacuated in 2007. Passionate about service, he has dedicated over 20,000 volunteer hours to various communities using military basketball to promote mental fitness and prevent harmful behaviors. Under Mike's leadership, the NBA has grown to include 4 major military basketball conferences comprising 44 to 50 volunteer varsity teams. Each year, the NBA playoffs and finals bring together military athletes, fostering camaraderie and leading issues like suicide prevention, post-traumatic stress injury, and post-traumatic stress injury. The tournament serves as a powerful platform to honor military service while strengthening support systems for veterans and active duty personnel. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you for having us on. Thank you so much.
Nicole, I'm going to start with you. Tell me a bit about how the documentary Resilience took off. And when you and I talked about this, I want to say even over a year ago. So tell our audience a little bit more about how this got started.
Well, it's been a long journey, definitely. So back in 2019, when I was wrapping up the film festivals for The Journey Back to Normal, one of our family friends approached me and asked if I was going to do a follow-up film. And I said, possibly. Why? And he said, because so many people and many people in the audiences really wanted to know the backstory of that military experience. And not even so much that combat experience, their entire life story, before the military, during the military, and then, of course, after the military. The Journey Back to Normal did focus on those healing therapies, which was really well received. But constantly audiences all over the country asked us that. So Colonel Nate Brookshire is still a good friend. He said, you've got to do a follow-up story. So we started out with Hidden Wounds, which is based in South Carolina. And amazing group. They do retreats. They do a lot of different things with veterans there. And their number one mission is suicide prevention. And after hearing their stories and some others, just talking over and over again, we thought that it would be a national story. And Hidden Wounds ended up being just part of that story. So that's why we changed the title to Resilience. So
there's
yes,
so much of a bigger story than just the wounds. I mean, really,
it really is.
I mean, and then Mike, how did you get involved?
Well, I'd announced we decided to have our NBA championship final at Temple University in Philadelphia. And I was talking I'd met Nicole through LinkedIn, and she just so happened to be like in Jersey or in the Northeast. And I invited her out to our press conference. And so she got a chance to hear a little bit about, what the NBA was all about. And then we kind of went over to the VA and we had a discussion with Dave Goodman, her other partner with this endeavor. And I said, there's the reason behind the Military Basketball Association is because of, what I I in 2007 in May, during probably one of the lowest moments of the deployment. And I said, I wanted to tell that story because that's the reason why the Military Basketball Association exists, based off of the courage and the stories that I'd seen through that deployment. So I told her about this and I said, there's just this amazing story. It's bigger than Mike Meyers. It's bigger than the NBA. It's a really great story. And there's some tragedy in there. And Nicole was great. And I said, well, you got to meet, these people within the unit. And I was extremely amazed at her interest in how she could tell this story. And so from there, it was just, giving her contacts within the battalion from the Black Knights, and then telling her my story of what I had saw, what I experienced, and the different challenges I had with my own mental health and post-traumatic stress injuries. And sometimes people are uncomfortable talking about those things, especially when you start talking to the media and telling a story. But what I wanted to offer to Nicole was that telling a story, my story, might be the one thing that saves the lives of someone else. And so Nicole was all about it, and I'm just ecstatic and excited that that she's been able to get this far with the documentary and to interview people that are so instrumental and basically heroes in my eyes.
And on that note, and I don't normally do this, I've only done it one other time. I'm going to have the audience humor us for about 4 minutes, and we're going to play a clip from Resilience, and then we're going to actually talk to the subject of the clip, which is Robert O'Berg. So here we go. It's just a little bit about his story.
So I was born at Victory Memorial in Brooklyn and spent the majority of the time on Staten Island within the 5 boroughs. Family dynamic was definitely interesting growing up. Unfortunately, my parents got divorced when I was in about 3rd grade. Spent a lot of time on my own, kind of as a latchkey kid, walking back and forth to school, playing sports, helping out where I could. I tried to find that balance between schoolwork and academia, and also being an athlete. It was a little challenging at times. There wasn't always a positive male role model that was around. So I was pretty fortunate when coaches, friends of my best friends, my parents would kind of fill that role. I spent time with my neighbors, the Garcias. So they raised me up as their adopted Puerto Rican son, hanging out, getting exposed to the language and the culture. But also they put me in touch with retired teachers, and one particular mentor was George Hasselt. He was a Army medic in post-World War II Germany. He spoke German, was very cultured, and so after the war, he ended up becoming a high school teacher. He exposed me to the arts, particularly here in New York City. Go see Pavarotti and La Boheme at the Met. I really was able to share a different side of life with me that I would not have previously had. We would have many meals together, and it would be a frequent topic to come up, where it's encouraged and from his perspective expected to serve, really to serve others and to serve your country first. So I definitely got that from him. 9/11, September 11th, has been a huge factor in my life. Unfortunately, on that day, I lost 2 cousins that were on the fire department of New York City, Dennis Patrick O'Berg and Christopher Michael Mazzello. As I kind of recall those moments, it was a moment that really the world stopped and mourned such a vicious attack that claimed thousands of civilian lives. Those were really dark moments in the city, and coupled with a sense of duty, that was kind of what propelled me to combat and really made me want to enlist. I withdrew from the City University of New York. I essentially dropped out of college to serve. I was reading about it in the New York Times and Task Force Tarawa and the rush to Baghdad, the battles of Al-Najaf in the cemeteries. So those were the things that really motivated me to serve and really to be part of the effort to protect America and particularly my city.
Wow.
Hello, Robert.
Wow.
It's
I'm not sure if you
powerful.
got the right guy.
The family pictures, yeah, they still give me chills. They're just amazing.
Yeah, like that. The way you ended that, Nicole, I think I texted you about that earlier today. I was just like, whoa, wow, it's powerful. So, Robert, tell me a little bit about how you got involved in the documentary.
You know, it's frequently said it's all about relationships, and actually, no better place in the story to pick up than the theme of education. That has also been a consistent thread in my life. I found myself using the VA's VR&E program as I was waiting a medical retirement board, while I found myself at Wounded Warrior Battalion West on Camp Pendleton, California. And it brought me to University of Southern California. So I met a fellow Trojan, U.S. Naval officer, Matthew Mitchelson, Lazy Lab Hunting Club, a nonprofit organization. And Matthew had worked with Nicole previously, helping to tell the story, to assist veterans and their families. A large part of this story that often gets overlooked is the wider community of support and the caregivers that help nurture us and put us back as closely to whole as possible upon return. And I like to say that the rest was history. A New Yorker got to meet someone from Philly, being in the tri-state, and next thing you know, Nicole, Michael, and the whole team have got lights and they're interviewing me. And we're in historic Francis Tavern. So I wish that was my living room. It's not.
Right.
One really important piece about the documentary to highlight is this is only one singular story that has multiple connections. And it's incredibly humbling to just continue to share what is possible on behalf of our military affiliated communities. And that location was very important as George Washington gave his farewell address to the officers of the Continental, primarily Army. So I appreciate our Army brethren as a Marine, and that is where, for the first time since the conduct of the war for our independence, the general, now about to become President Washington, had primarily lost his sight due to old age and started to weep about his inability to read the letter that he had prepared to share with the men and the officers that had fought so valiantly for our independence. So that's really what it was about, in a very long-winded, circuitous way, about connecting to service, an opportunity to roll up our sleeves and get after the work that needs to be done.
Nicole, tell me a little bit about why you wanted to start with the story of the Black Knights. Like, what was the significance there?
So after having interviewed 50 plus veterans, and nonprofits, we had so many stories in the can, right? But the missing link was an entire team that deployed together. And we asked others about, possibly interviewing some folks they were deployed with, but it just never materialized. So when, I met Mike, and he said, there is a special story you need to film. And the rest is history. Yes. I mean, it was the missing link. The perspectives of an entire group deploying together was just so eye-opening, even for myself and my film crew. And it's going to be for the larger community, especially the civilian community, because that's one of the goals of the series, is to bridge that communication gap. Because sometimes living in the Northeast, it's very, very challenging to explain to a friend or a family member or someone in the community about this military experience, and they just don't care. And that breaks my heart. So that is one of the goals of the series, is to really help them understand and be more empathetic at the end of the day, and maybe possibly help a nonprofit. Not every veteran is broken. We all know that. We've interviewed superstars, including those on this podcast, and multimillionaire real estate investors, business tycoons, you name it, authors. The list goes on and on. The women.
General Petraeus, I saw the other day.
Oh, it was so amazing. Yeah, I'm still starstruck. But anyway, yeah. So that's why we thought it was just very fitting to make it, the very first season.
Yeah, Mike, how did you know that story was going to be a touch point? What was it about that deployment and about the men and women you served with there, that you just knew?
I will be honest, and one, just humbled that Nicole, a producer like that would even, take the time to hear my story, but she listened to it with such interest. I knew that we were in a historic moment in formation in 2007, days after we had gotten hit, and we'd lost all those people who served, just brave souls that gave their all. In that formation, I knew it was a historic moment, because one, we had been doing a lot of just great work during the deployment, at least from what I had seen. And we had gotten really, as in the military, they say, punched in the gut. I mean, we had taken a lot of gut punches that month and even during that deployment that were really hard. But that moment, it was like I watched, my leaders make a decision not to turn a neighborhood into another Fallujah, right? And so that in that moment, I could feel a lot of hatred in the formation of people that wanted to just get, even and revenge. But the calm that the leaders had, from Dale Keel to Chris Rogers to Chip Daniels to Mike Ernst, who was the company commander who lost quite a few people during that deployment, observing that, understanding that the political climate back home was not for the surge, not for more troops, more for getting out. The war wasn't popular, understanding that entire climate in that environment, I understood that I was literally in the presence of a historic moment. And so what I did was try to, one, do my job, okay, follow the orders that were given to me and bring the people that I was responsible for home, but also realize that what this was a turning point. And so as I watched my leaders, I realized that there was a story within a story within a story. But the overall story for me, coming back so different, coming back, having to adjust to society, the world moving too fast and me moving too slow, and then me moving too fast, this is the experience of every veteran, combat veteran that's been out there. And it's even bigger than the Black Knights, right? Because people come back different from war, especially after you've been through a traumatic experience. And so what I wanted to do was take this traumatic experience that I'd been through and turn it into something positive. And I was able to do that through sports and basketball, but I never forgot like my why. And my why was, just because you've been through something traumatic doesn't mean that you stay in this posture of survival. You go from suffering from it to surviving with it to thriving in spite of it. And that's kind of where I'm at.
You know, Mike, I say this all the time on the show, and it's something I just deeply believe. And I feel that people who've been through the worst traumas, whether it's in their childhood, whether it's an car accident or a tragic illness or in a war situation, they go down two paths. One is that path of self-destruction and addiction, or they work their way through it. And I truly do believe that these are some of the most successful and accomplished people in our society. They're sometimes the most creative artists. They are the most personality driven people. And that's something that just has always really kept me going, because I've had some childhood trauma, and I'm always so inspired when I see people who have had like the worst things happen, and they're just able to turn that around. I mean, Robert, I know you can relate to that as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate you mentioning that, Teresa. While a big part of this conversation has been our collective combat experiences, I also do want to acknowledge my brothers and sisters that have struggled with the difficulties stemming from military sexual trauma, myself included. And I do want to highlight that it's not an either or conversation on the paths that we take. It usually is an end, because I can only speak for myself, not the wider community. But it took being in those deepest moments, feeling isolated, where the narratives of you must suffer in silence, that's what brave people do. Don't bring more problems. There's already enough. That mantra took time to subside. And it is the resilience of all of these folks that I know our panel here would agree with me, that is really humbling, the quality of human beings. And that's what these stories they do. They promote a path to healing where you can start the process and the journey of feeling a sense of community again by telling this story. The hardest thing for me as a combat veteran and an MST survivor is asking for the assistance, because there's an element of humility, there's an element of ego. And again, for myself personally, I used to believe that it was an acknowledgement of weakness. And I could not have been more incorrect and wrong. It's from sharing the story that we have an opportunity to address the morally injurious events that literally wounded my soul, to fight, to fly combat missions, and have to assume the solemn honor of returning our fallen home with dignity, and yet to return home to know that most of what we did and participated in and supported no longer gets discussed publicly. There's not a lack of dialogue. There's a lack of civility. We could go on, but that's down a path of negativity. And so I think the real element of this, and the piece that is the resilient piece, is salvaging those horrific experiences and moments, and being able to leverage all the platforms and all the tools, social media, podcasts, writing books, the performing arts,
Right.
To bring a sense of community back together. It's easy to be divided, and that is something that also should be discussed, probably in another segment and another time in another context. But united we stand, and we divided we fall. And if we're too busy and focusing on the identities that we carry that separate us,
I
that
agree.
divide us, then it's going to be a long road. So a very long-winded way. I like to say, hey, I don't go down rabbit holes. I tunnel and burrow like Fraggle Rock in the 1980s. Feed myself. But that's really what it's about, is how do we take these awful, horrible experiences where we see the best of humanity. As Nicole and Michael were talking, I just did a brief exercise. I tried to recount the U.S. Marine Corps Medal of Honor recipients from the global war on terrorism, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other ones. And I started running out of paper, along with the Navy Cross recipients. Sergeant Major Justin LaHue, doing fantastic things for our veteran community. When I was doing that interview referring to Task Force Terror, I was reading about what he was doing as a gunnery sergeant in the JOF, in the invasion, in the New York Times. And I said, I am literally reading history. I am able-bodied, I'm impacted, and this is what I'm going to carry and go forward. NCOs, incredible NCOs, non-commissioned officers, Corporal Kyle Carpenter, Corporal Jason Dunham, Sergeant Dakota Meyer, Sergeant Rafael Peralta, which I am emboldened and looking forward to the new SecDef advancing a review for Sergeant Peralta to be considered for the Medal of Honor for his conspicuous activities. Major Marine Corps Mustang Brian Shantosh, Navy Cross recipient. And this was in like a 60 seconds of intense mental attention to try to recall these tremendous acts. A lot of times in life, just showing up is a tremendous act. And yet we have these fantastic experiences, specimens of humanity that in the worst of conditions have shown, at least me, and I like to think many other people, what's possible. So the story doesn't end when you come back home. That reintegration, the many generations of veterans, our customs, our traditions, our ways of celebrating, our pride in our uniform, in our flag, and the protections and freedoms that we provide for not only our fellow citizens and countrymen and women, but for those around the world. How many conflicts has the United States supported the sovereignty and the freedom of others? That is a tremendous story. Those couple of names are the creme de la creme, but so many other people contributed to keeping us safe and having an opportunity for us to even share this space and continue to tell these stories. So again, a very long road to a small house in the middle of in the woods. Hopefully someone's listening. There is healing.
Oh, go ahead, Nicole.
Serving others.
Okay,
And
definitely. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wanted to mention too that not only are families impacted here, but there are families impacted where we are around the world. And that's something that's not on the forefront either, is that there's families there. They have sons, they have daughters, they have babies. So
yeah, Scott Mann talks a lot about Afghanistan and the people that they left behind or the people that they've brought over from Afghanistan. And it's really incredible when you think about, as a serving member, all the people that you've interacted with overseas and have brought the missions that you've done and the ways in which you've worked together. And absolutely, those stories can never, ever be forgotten. And it's important to have people like you, Nicole, who can use documentary film, or even with me with this podcast, being able to record these stories. Tracer Burnout is another great example. They do wonderful work for the GWOT community. And I mean, I believe that this is a medium that more people should learn how to do. In fact, next week, I'm going to be going on military and veterans in journalism and doing a webinar about starting podcasts, because I believe that more veterans, this is a wonderful way to give back and to be of service. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. I mean, less than $1,000 a year, you can get a StreamYard account and a Buzzsprout and hosting, and you can do this. I mean, this isn't something that has to be complicated, but it's important for us to get these stories out there. And tell me a little bit, Nicole, about how you brought together the rest of these stories. You had the Black Knight as sort of the first touch point. And then how did you start to bring in the other stories like Robert's?
Mm-hmm. Well, we had a goal to basically interview veterans within nonprofits initially, but then it kind of expanded when some veteran women and men came to me, or I went to them, and LinkedIn is, basically the place, a little bit on Facebook as well. And we started to, film these stories all over the country. Sometimes we would be on the road for a paid gig, and then we'd kind of take a detour and said, oh, I have to, film Jack Scott in Virginia, and she's 3 hours away. So we were able to film her story a couple of years ago. And as we were organizing the seasons, because originally it was a documentary too, so that as well, there's going to be a whole season on women veterans, and then a whole season on men who experienced the black box. They talk about the black box anyway. And then also military sexual trauma.
What is the black box?
It's hard to explain. Maybe one of you all can explain it, but I mean, I can, take a stab at it. Basically, it's this place in your mind where you put all those bad memories inside that black box. It's basically compartmentalizing. Yes, compartmentalizing. But the black box is always there, but there may be a trigger or a conversation that might open that black box. And so, for example, the first time I heard that term was in South Carolina when I was interviewing the Hidden Wounds folks. And one individual was actually a Vietnam vet, and he talked about the black box. And then Lance Newman talked about it as well. And it was triggered when one of his friends committed suicide. So there's a whole season on, folks that talk about that as well. So there's, different themes to each season, if you will.
Each season. And you're in post-production now. Where are you looking to stream? I mean, streaming is the thing these days. Yeah. I'm guessing is that there'll be a streaming service at some point that will come along, and there'll be a way for people to watch the show. So what are you kind of looking at?
Yes, all of them. But, Amazon Prime, Pluto TV, TCL, The Journey Back to Normal is on all of those as well. But I guess I won't say anything.
Yes, you can't get into the details right now. You're still in the negotiations and the talking phase.
Yeah, Mike might slap me through the podcast.
No,
No. I think this is such an amazing endeavor. Well, tell me a little bit about what it was like, Robert, for you to be filmed and to talk about some of this stuff on camera.
And Mike as well, because we filmed in Texas just in December with Mike.
I'll turn it over to Mike. Actually, Mike, you go first since Robert, you just talked.
I didn't mean
over to you, Mike. first.
I don't want to take you to LA by way of Minnesota. So no, it's been great. And Nicole, just working with her, the biggest thing is if I've got a platform, with like CBS Sports and connections with Paramount, Veterans Network, which is basically how we got on, we were able to get the exposure that we have right now through Betty Diaz. The experience talking about it first, I want to go back. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. Robert mentioned some things about being more comfortable, but the truth is things like this, platforms like this, we are changing the stigma and making it easier for people to talk about mental health and the challenges that a lot of us face. And so, Teresa, by you doing these podcasts, Robert, what he's doing and what Nicole's doing is we have graduated as a society to where, the greatest generation in World War II, they never talked about anything.
No, they didn't.
The Vietnam era guys came back different, and they were looked at like, like they were crazy. And so, and that was an era where the country did not feel like they didn't support the war.
Mm-mm.
And now we're in a place where the country is unified around its soldiers and its veterans. But when we were deployed, I think when Robert and I when we all went out and we came back, if we wanted to advance promotion wise, we couldn't have these types of issues or at least talk about them. And so what I realized was that, at some point, the actual courage is not to hide behind what you've been through and your trauma, to actually face it. And so that's what this helps other people do. It helps other people face their trauma and learn how to thrive in it and thrive from it. And so for me, talking about this, I love to put on a suit and tie and discuss things and represent the brand and the NBA. But I will tell you, it was hard. It was extremely difficult to open up one of the most, traumatic experiences in my life, if not the most, and discuss it. And you're talking about, I was, younger. I was, just turned 30. And, we're talking about, I've been out 66 times. 66 times I went outside the wire and I could have ultimately lost my life. 66 times that I can remember, I gave the order for our entire convoy to go to, red direct and be ready to engage the enemy, right, on convoys. And so what we did was important. Robert listed the different names of people that were just incredible acts of valor. But I also look at the folks that weren't recognized, that were in my unit, that, were a part of history, were a part of that moment. So when I talk about it, and Nicole can kind of tell you this, it's emotional. It's definitely emotional. When you start talking about, what actually happened on May 19th, the conversation that I had with Mike Ernst on the radio, and listening to him emotionally be touched by the actual situation on the ground and what he had to deal with, to see Chip Daniels experience one of the most traumatic days in the battalion, and that's his first day in the unit, to watch Chris Rogers lead the unit while the battalion commander was not actively there and was on his way back, and then to see the battalion commander say, hey, look, I'm going to make a decision that may impact my career, may impact, the war, but also, save lives, to be a witness to all of that. And then to talk about it again, close to 20 years later, very emotional, very impactful, but definitely a story that really needs to be told. And I was honored to do it. I did have to take a moment. There was some Kleenex in the room, and Nicole was really good about that. But it was emotional, and seeing the guys seeing people in our unit and seeing how they're now living their lives and thriving.
Oh, that had to be
It
transformational. I
was,
didn't think about that.
yeah, it was just like, wow, I hadn't seen Sergeant Major Mays and Command Sergeant Major Mays in forever. And he looks like the same Command Sergeant Major Mays,
Yeah.
you know. And some of these guys, you know, some of them had, you know, we had canes and some of them were a little older. But it was almost like a big hail and farewell. But it was an emotional moment, and we came together, we told our story, and now it's up to us to make sure that it gets on a great streaming platform, so that this gets told. And I'm going to do whatever I can to try to make that happen.
Well, I'm going to do whatever I can to try to help you guys promote it, because I know that there is nothing out there like what Nicole has produced. There is no GWOT documentary of a major battle that was a turning point, or that did something that was significant, or that broke the mold. And there's no story of that exists. And one of the things that the public often sees, which is not a bad thing, because there's stories that need to be told, but there's such an emphasis, I feel like, within the veteran community to only focus on special forces. And there's so much more to the military than special forces. There's all these other units, and there's all these other stories. And that's, again, just to toot the Roger and the Tracer Burnout guys. I mean, that was one of the reasons why they started their podcast, was because they saw that there was this lack of storytelling about the GWOT generation from all these other perspectives and people who have experienced combat in different ways. I mean, even me, I served in combat zones. I didn't do the things that you guys did. I was in the Navy, but we did serve in war. Things changed drastically on any of the warships that I was on when we were in a combat situation. And those situations, they stress people out. They make people do things and that's another whole side to this too, is it's not just sometimes the combat, it's the way people react when they're stressed and the way they treat one another. And Robert, I don't know if you can touch on that a little bit too, but there's an interpersonal side to this as well that makes things difficult in these situations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for highlighting this portion of the conversation, Teresa. My why, Michael shared his earlier, and the nonprofit, the Honor Foundation, helped me understand the importance of telling our story, is simply to live a life worthy of their sacrifice. I don't specify who there are. I believe each one of us has or can have folks that motivate us to be our best selves. On that note, telling this story, which I don't believe is my story, I believe it's my fallen cousin's story. This is about, for me, again, the law enforcement, the first responders, the paramedics, the EMTs, the 343 FDNY firefighters, the corrections officers, the court officers, anyone who was in a position to aid and assist distressed humans, both American citizens and plenty of tourists and foreign guest workers on 9/11. From that one event, so many of our lives were
changed. Oh, yeah.
So Nicole talked about the compartmentalization, and all credit. And there's enough to go around. And it's amazing what happens when we don't look for the credit. It is actually through being an enabler, a combat service support provider, supporting special forces, our intelligence community, the other unique capabilities like the female engagement team.
Oh, yeah.
From the Marine Corps, our lioness. Within JSOC, our cultural support team, female service members that gained access to a portion of civilizations and societies that we were operating in to increase our cultural understanding and operational relevance. So there is so much here. You mentioned earlier Lieutenant Colonel retired Scott Mann. I had an opportunity through the Honor Foundation and some of the work that I'm also now doing with the Pat Tillman Foundation. And as Michael mentioned, there's a role of adaptive sports in healing too. The Pat Tillman Foundation, in response to Pat leaving a lucrative professional sports career to serve his nation and losing his life in Afghanistan and putting it all on the line, is their sacrifices that I carry. And each one of us does that. Asking for help, going with Nicole and the film crew, with the generosity of the 9/11 Memorial Museum, down into the bedrock of both the North and the South Towers, and having the extremely rare opportunity to film, is probably about as difficult a thing as I have ever done in my life.
Wow.
And
well,
and there's a couple of pieces that did not stitch their way into the promo trailer, but I do hope that collectively we crowdsource all the resources required to get everything out of post-production and onto the film screens, into the film festivals, in any forum. Even the Library of Congress has the National Veterans, I'm not sure of the official title, but oral tradition to record this part of our history. Real quick, to go back to Ground Zero, where, again, this is the nexus of my experience, but there's so many other versions around the world. To read a plaque that simply said, Geronimo, 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 and the impact of knowing that our special forces tracked down the mastermind, Osama bin Laden, of the 9/11 attacks, brought, it wasn't happiness and it wasn't healing, a very small sense of closure to losing my own flesh and family. But then the story can't end there. Even with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, at some point, there's got to be something done. So just real quick, I realize I've gone a little bit long, which is not the first time I may be realizing that. But this is where the restorative practices and the restorative justice that I've been fortunate enough to be invited in to facilitate in conferencing. Restorative justice primarily has worked its way from the criminal justice system, K through 12, higher ed, Title IX, sexual harm and sexual violence, and is an alternative to the punitive justice system. Now, I'm not saying there's not a role for that, but even after there's a victim and an offender and someone has done their proverbial time, that doesn't heal those wounds, those soul wounds. So getting to a point where either an individual, a group, a community, maybe even someday a nation, can accept responsibility and attempt to repair the harm is the only way that those relationships continue. And
oh my gosh, Robert, you're so right.
This is a microcosm of the larger piece. And, they say a rising tide lifts all ships. So, tonight we'll honor our naval services. But it literally took a village, both operationally forward as well as coming back home. I like to think I come from the largest little village there is in the world, which is New York City and the 5 boroughs. But even there, something positive must come out of these horrific moments in our history. And so if there's a single person that's listening to this, that's on the cusp of, hey, do I self-identify? And this is a large piece of it too, that was extremely difficult for me. Not only do I navigate the world the way I look and appear, I am also aided by a service animal, which Nicole's original idea for the Hidden Wounds documentary, which we talked about now, became Resilience. There's some irony in the film of myself and Harvest, because I've had to self-identify, and in the process to heal, I'm aided by another creature, a loving black lab that's food motivated, just like me. And, and she's got a patriotic vest on. I made sure, with some help from our local, tailor, to get a prisoner of war missing in action patch, a POW MIA. And I can think about my biggest heroes who are in the work of repatriating our fallen home decades after they fell in service to our nation. And it's in service. That year that I was rehabilitating and getting help, the honesty, I'm starting to get a little worked up here. In the beginning of COVID, my family and I were deployed to Okinawa, Japan. I had just come back to stateside for some training right before the travel ban got initiated. The measures were draconian, where they had a restriction of movement, so policy, which would incur a 14-day order for you if you fell under the Status of Forces Agreement, the SOFA, as a guest of the government of Japan, to remain in your government quarters or isolated. If you test for COVID, if someone tested in your family, I found myself in 28 straight days isolated in my government quarters. That was the first time in 17 years I had ever stopped. The beginning was cool. The first couple of days, Netflix and chill, hanging out, you don't have to shave. But then everything that I stored away, that I threw in the gunny locker, the whiskey locker, as we say in the Marine Corps, and hid, opened up.
Yeah.
I couldn't paint it. And it was the moment that I'm with those that I love the most, my 3 small children and my wife of 20 years, Nicole, when I could not enjoy their company and their presence, when the civil unrest in the Pacific Northwest and precincts of police officers were burning, and there is, in my opinion, more than just freedom of expression, freedom of a protest, and straight violence, caused in me the condition that made me say enough is enough and I need help to be able to help others. Mm-hmm. So a very long portion of this segment, but I'm trying to weave it all together. I told you we'll borrow. I'll get us back.
No, I understand what you're saying. It's like you sometimes need these come to Jesus moments. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well,
it's go ahead.
This is tribal. And now having the advantage of being afforded an opportunity by some of those gracious nonprofits to include Custom K9 Service Dog Academy, which contributed to Harvest and paired us up almost 3 years ago. Now I celebrate that opportunity to appear as my authentic self, because Harvest breaks the ice.
Yep.
She helps cut the tension because of her, incredible disposition as a black lab.
Yeah.
And when I'm on military installations, when I'm around first responders, when I'm around law enforcement, when I'm around with our dedicated folks in the intelligence community, this is just one of the conduits. I'm so honored to rub elbows with how many incredible people we have. And to tie it all together, we have the most cutting edge technology, but yet we're some of the most disconnected we've ever been. If that's not ironic, folks, then I don't know what else is.
And I encourage everybody to listen to the latest Sean Ryan show with the new Secretary of Veterans Affairs. And he talked exactly about what you're talking about, Robert, about how we have all of these nonprofits who have stepped up to help the GWOT generation, and how it's really not the major VSOs that our generation is utilizing as much. It is these smaller mom and pop nonprofits, or people like yourself, Nicole, who are bringing these stories to light, or the NBA, and that's who has stepped up. And Secretary Collins is very aware of that. And it was a pretty enlightening conversation. He was very raw and very honest with Sean on all of the things that need to be fixed when it comes to this massive industrial complex that we call the VA, and how there definitely needs to be more of a centralized role that the VA is playing to take over some of these services that these nonprofits are currently doing, because they're filling the gap that us veterans need.
I saw the interview, and the NBA has worked with is working with the VA at different centers around the country. But what the secretary pointed out was that there are efforts to reduce suicide and harmful behaviors, but some of the metrics aren't adding up. And so when you take the things that Robert just talked about, you talk about the platform that the NBA has. We're trying to share that platform, not just with the VA, but with everyone else, to get the word out that there are things that are actually working. To say in the last 8 years since we've been doing this with sports, we haven't had one ideation and one suicide from folks that are participating in the Military Basketball Association, not just with veterans, but also with our active duty. Those are the types of metrics that I think the secretary would be interested in. And I encourage him, if he ever listens to this podcast, I would love to have that discussion. I would love to figure out ways where we are able to work together as a small nonprofit, but with a platform that we're willing to share across the country. So I saw that interview, the things that he was saying about psychedelics and where he wanted to take the VA's interest. It was very powerful and moving about where he's going to take the Department of Veterans Affairs. So everything, we're not always going to agree on the policies that our leaders and our politicians put forward. What we can all agree on are two things. One, we support our military, our armed forces, and we support our veterans who have already served. And that's what I believe that the new secretary is coming in to do. There are some things that are going to be debated and disagreed upon or agreed upon. But at the end of the day, the fact and the questions, the main question is, what are we doing? And if we're doing whatever we can, I think that's a testament to whoever's in charge.
Well, it's hopeful when you hear his background. I mean, he was a chaplain, or he is a chaplain. He's an Air Force Reserve colonel. He's a lawyer. He's been a congressman. I mean, it was really impressive to hear all the different perspectives that he has. And I got the sense that he's doing this as a passion project in his late 50s to really make a difference.
He spoke very candidly.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Was very direct. He was very candid about things. And he said, you know, hey, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at that.
Let's question this and that.
And the thing, yeah. So I'm all for it. I just think that at the end of the day, it's not a divisive issue to take care of our veterans and to take care of our military. That's something everyone agrees about. So yeah, I was impressed with the interview.
Me too.
To see where you know that conversation's going.
Mm-hmm.
And we probably got to close this one out because we're already a little bit over our hour. I try to keep these to an hour, but sometimes they go over. In fact, a lot of times they do. But Nicole, tell us a little bit more about the next steps, and if people want to know more about the documentary or how they can support, let us know how.
Sure. Well, our website, ameliomedia.com, and our fiscal sponsor is Filmmakers Collaborative. So all donations are tax deductible. And yeah, just stay tuned for the next. We have
next
a couple.
Steps.
Yes, next steps, and we definitely have a few more film shoots to go for the Black Knights.
Wonderful.
So yes. And I will add one more thought is that, you know, what Mike is doing, he's not only affecting active duty military, I'll take us full circle to families, affects and impacts families tremendously. Even in our film process, I've had wives reach out or family members reach out and say, thank you. He needed to tell his story. It was very therapeutic. So anyway,
that's so wonderful.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So families are positively impacted when their veteran or active duty person in their family is healed.
Well, when people tell their stories, it is like a weight is lifted. And I often say the story that we first tell is not the same story that we tell 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Just getting that story out and then coming back to that story 5 years later, 10 years later. I mean, the way I talk about my parents now versus how I talked about them 5 years ago is different because the relationships change, the insights change, the reflections change, and that's okay. But when you get that story out and you feel heard and your perspective is out there, then you feel understood, you feel just empowered. That's why it's so important to have these platforms. And Robert, did you have anything you wanted to add before we close out the call?
Just briefly. And it is those stories of others in our own family. My wife's grandfather, Bob McKellogg, invaded Europe to defeat the Nazis.
Wow.
From Anzio all the way up 2.5 years later to the liberation of Dachau. He came home and didn't talk about it. Was an Irish Catholic father of 11. His son, Jack, served in Vietnam, came home and didn't talk about it. Finally, my mother-in-law, Marilyn, and my wife, Nicole, said, we're not going to do this for another generation.
Yeah.
Good.
They
That's how
are
it changes.
champions and advocates, but the reason I am alive and can share this story of others. Bob did what had to be done. Was combat wounded, recognized for valor, and came home and fulfilled his responsibilities to his family. At some point, though, this is the legacy that we inherit. And I question, are we doing enough? And doing enough doesn't cost a cent. It costs nothing to be a good person and try to improve yourself and help out others along the way. So
I agree.
support that with, and
Thank you.
we're the beneficiaries of this experiment, this American experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for the opportunity to just share and highlight other stories because they build us up and they make us stronger together. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Mike. I will meet you all backstage while I go full screen, but thank you very much for coming on the Stories of Service podcast.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
All right, guys, that is a wrap. Thank you all for joining us. I have another show this week. I'm actually having Jason Logren on. He is with America's First Vets. It is a political advocacy group that works with veterans and other first responders and others in the community. I can't wait to get into it. I told you guys I wasn't going to be political, but I'm really just giving his story. And I just can't wait to share it with you and talk about how veterans can get involved in the political arena in a respectful and healthy way. So, as I always close out these calls, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye now.
Good night.